With the U.S. Navy spreading its assets across the globe, America's military is going toe-to-toe with Russia in the Black Sea and Pacific Ocean. While Washington is citing aggression by Russia, many would say Moscow is simply in a defensive stance against foreign entities nearing and sometimes entering its waters. RT's Alex Mihailovich has the story.
Russia called it an attempt to intrude on its territorial waters. While Russia and China were in the middle of conducting joint naval drills this month, according to the Russian government, the USS Chaffee came as close as 66 yards from its Navy's Admiral Tribut's destroyer before changing course and speeding away. This footage provided by Russia's defense ministry shows the $1 billion U.S. guided missile destroyer coming too close for comfort to the joint Chinese-Russian exercises in Russia's waters in the Pacific Ocean. This is not the only recent provocation in the area of Russia's Peter the Great Bay. Back in November 2020, the U.S. Navy destroyer USS John McCain invaded the same Russian waters. The American destroyer was chased off by a Russian destroyer, which threatened to ram the U.S. vessel if it did not change course. It is not a secret that the U.S. and its allies have been flexing their naval muscle in both the Pacific and the Black Sea, areas that border Russia. Back in June, Russia says that its territory was violated in the Black Sea, and that warning shots were fired from Russia's patrol ships as well as a bomb dropped from a warplane to keep a British destroyer out of its waters.
If you don't change your course to starboard, I'll be fired.
While the UK has denied the account, President Putin called the incident a provocation.
It is not us who came to them crossing thousands of kilometers by air or by water. It is they who approached our borders and violated our maritime territory. And that is an essential element of this situation.
The incident was the first time since the Cold War that Moscow acknowledged using live ammunition to deter a NATO warship. Now, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin is practically assuring that more run-ins will happen between the West and Russia. Recently, Austin was on a trip to nations that border the Black Sea, signaling that the Biden administration sees the area as an arena where it can challenge Russia.
Well, security and stability of the Black Sea are in the U.S.'s national interest, and they're critical to the security of NATO's eastern flank.
Understandably, Russia's not taking what can be described as NATO creep lightly. There is no sign that the U.S. and its allies will be backing down from provoking Russia anytime soon. Washington understands well that the Black Sea is a strategic crossroads between Europe and Asia. And as for the Asia-Pacific, the U.S. is keen to maintain its dominance in the region, even though its power is dwindling. A fact that may be the reason for its risky and often dangerous behavior. For In Question, I'm Alex Mihailovich.
And here to expand on all of this, former UK MP George Galloway. So George, first up, Japanese officials are reporting that Chinese and Russian Navy vessels sailed uncomfortably close to Japan's shores, 3 nautical miles versus the customary 12. The cabinet official called this provocative and that the move was a relic of the Cold War. What's behind this sentiment coming out of the Japanese today?
Well, what the cabinet secretary did not say was that the Chinese and Russian ships were in international waters. They were never in Japanese waters. The place in question is what's called a choke point. It is only 3 nautical miles from one island to another island, and the middle channel, if you like, was the one that the Chinese and Russian ships sailed through. Indisputably international waters. You see, this kind of propaganda gets spun all the time. Anyone reading that thinks that the Chinese and Russians gratuitously steamed to within 3 nautical miles of the Japanese frontier, but they never left international waters. Japan is being drawn in to this axis, I won't call it of evil, though that's what George Bush might have done, an axis which is seeking to confront Russia and China. And President Putin made the bull point here. There are no Russian and Chinese warships off the coast of the United States, but there are plenty of naval assets that have sailed thousands of kilometers all the way from the US and elsewhere that are now menacing the shores of China and Russia.
Yeah, perhaps a lovely day for a sail, George. You don't know. The newly installed U.S. Navy Secretary Carlos Del Toro says the U.S. will seek to, quote, deter such provocations by, and this is another quote, reminding China and Russia basically to behave, and that behavior simply won't be tolerated. Now, those are very polite diplomatic words, George. What does that mean for us in plain language? Translate this.
Well, it's turning up the dial of hostile propaganda so that if anything is going to happen, or might happen even accidentally, the culpability for it can be deflected onto the other side. The US, Britain, Australia, India, Japan are sailing in the South China Sea in international waters to protect what they call the right of international navigation. But when China and Russia sail in international waters, exercising their rights of navigation, it becomes an act of aggression. George Orwell, you should be alive at this time. This is double speak.
George, meanwhile, the ASEAN Virtual Summit is underway. Joe Biden made his appearance last night. He offered up $100 million to the bloc, looking to strengthen ties with the Asian Pacific nations, but some might say by influence. What do you think?
Well, a lot of Americans will be surprised that you've got $100 million to spare. After all, the big Joe Biden stimulus package has been dogged by people saying it was too expensive. But hey, here's $100 million to the ASEAN, which is almost the richest collection of countries anywhere to be found in the world. So I'm not sure they need American dollars, at least not quite as much as they need them in Illinois or any of the other crumbling infrastructure states of the U.S. It was a magic trick produced out of a top hat, like a silk handkerchief, and just about as useful.
All good points, George. And real briefly, I got to say this. Where I sit right now, very close to Baltimore, Maryland, where the Ukrainian military has just wrapped up training with the U.S. counterparts, the U.S. is handing over small combat vessels to the Ukrainians to strengthen their at-sea defense capabilities, presumably against Russia at the Black Sea. What do you make of this donation?
Well, when the history of this period comes to be written, I think that the peculiar love affair between U.S. administrations and Ukraine will be seen, as if there's anyone left alive to write that history, will be seen as a very grave mistake. You are arming and egging on a far-right nationalist government in Kiev, which might provoke war with Russia, and then you might have to be drawn in. And what could possibly go wrong in those circumstances? You are making what's called a mosquito fleet. That's what the U.S. calls it. And that's probably accurate. These are little rowing boats that you and I would happily go for a sail in. Sure. They are a mosquito. Mosquitoes can annoy a bear, but they can't do much else.
Very good. Very well put. George Galloway, always appreciate your take. Thank you.